Good morning, this is Paul Check, and welcome to Spirituality or 10 Commandments. You choose Lesson 3. In this lesson, we will compare ethics and morals for clear distinction. Morals are codes of conduct based on the survivability of the individual, tribe, flock, herd, group, etc. The key thing I want to point out about morals is that many people and religious factions believe we would not be moral without religious teaching. This, unfortunately, is completely incorrect. This has been researched by anthropologists, biologists, sociologists, and it has been shown that morals are codes of conduct that exist in pretty much every aspect of the animal kingdom. Chimpanzees have morals. Dogs, cats, ants, bees, all have morals. They all have codes of conduct for the survival of the organism. If you look at the research by Paul MacLean on the reptilian mind, he shows, for example, that all creatures have three primary concerns. First, am I safe? Second, can I find food? And only after they're safe and they have satiated themselves with food do they entertain procreation. There is an example of a moral code that is essential for survival in nature. So how do morals compare with ethics? Ethics are codes of conduct. Hitler had strong ethics, yet we must ask the question, were they moral? Ethics are codes of conduct. If you work for any corporation, you almost always have an employee manual. That is a manual of company ethics. If you work for the military, there's military ethics, etc. So the clear distinction is morals are based on survival. Ethics are codes of conduct. Man learns to love in stages. The stages that I share here, I learned from Osho. I added the fourth stage because, in my opinion, it can't be left out. The fourth stage is both the beginning and the metaphorical ending. First, we learn to love through sex and violence loving. Second, conditional loving. Third, empathetic and compassionate loving. And then our growth and development progresses until we completely abolish the ego or sense of self and become fully unified with the source of creation once again. Let's look at how these stages unfold. If you look at my diagram here, you see the fighter jet. The fighter jet exemplifies sex and violence loving. To explain how these stages of learning to love or spiritual growth and development emerge, the soul is all expansive. Remember, the soul from our first lecture equates to the center. So in the diagram that you see here, which would represent a solar system, a galaxy, a super galaxy, etc., the center, like the eye of a storm, is absolutely still. The center here represents unconditional love, or what people would refer to as God, if they really understand what God is. On the very outer edge, where you see the red arrow from the fighter jet, is where the most turbulence are, where the most destruction is. When we come into a body, we have to learn how to use a body, how to feel. We have to learn to feel our way through life. And while we're learning to feel, we're learning to think. All of us are born by an act of sex, and the process of learning how to use a body, as you know, can be violent. Children fall down stairs, fall off of bicycles, drink poison not knowing that it's poison. So our initial stages of development, for all intensive purposes, can be violent. And sadly, as Osho says, children are born God and their parents beat it out of them. Now, this just makes a point. Many people are indoctrinated into religious philosophies and other philosophies that are potentially violent, yet the child has no defense against this. So children, by and large, are born into a sex and violence environment. The next stage you see here with the young men sitting and protesting represents conditional loving, And that's a move inward where it's a little more calm. Here we get clear on what conditions we need in relationships to persons, places, and things to feel whole or to feel safe. Finally, represented by the Dalai Lama, you see empathetic and compassionate loving, and here consciousness rises to realize that battling is never a good long-term solution. And the key feature of a empathetic and compassionate lover is that they have enough life experience or wisdom to see where other people are at in their journey from sex and violence loving towards inner stillness or being a human being. Human being the doing part, being representative of the soul or the stillness or the point at which we reach full consciousness of the truth of ourselves through empathy and compassion. The empathetic and compassionate lover learns not to fight, but to find an equitable solution, which takes a lot of wisdom, as I'm sure many of you know. Paul Brunton lists stages of development that I think are very, very clear and important. First, in his stages of development as an ignorant materialist, he lives entirely within his personality and hence for personal benefit, regardless of much hurt caused to others, to secure his benefit. Sound familiar? Next, as an enlightened materialist, he is wrapped in his own fortunes but does not seek them at the expense of others. So here we see the second stage of development, creating conditions so that you get what you want without trashing or trampling over everybody else. Next, as a religionist, he perceives the impermanence of the ego, and with a sense of sacrifice, he denies his self-will. Here's our transition into empathetic and compassionate loving. Fourth, as a mystic, he acknowledges the existence of a higher power, God, but finds it only within himself. So this is the beginning of the spiritual quest, as I would refer to it. Finally, as a philosopher, he recognizes the universality and the oneness of being in others and practices altruism with joy. Here, we're capable of turning and looking back on our life path and on our experiences and seeing how much more beauty there is in supporting, helping, and loving people and finding non-violent solutions. I believe the Dalai Lama is an excellent example of that type of behavior and personification. Now, if you look at the work of Ken Wilber, here he beautifully synthesizes the work of many researchers who have found these stages of development to be pretty much consistent throughout human beings, and even in the animal kingdom there are similar stages of development, and I've listed them generally on the left so you can see this progression. So in conclusion for our lecture today, morals are codes of conduct created with the explicit intention of increasing survivability. Look at the news any day of the week, any time, and you will see the difference between a moral and an ethic very, very clearly. Ethics are codes of conduct that may or may not enhance survivability. Human beings learn to love in three primary stages that reflect developmental stages found by numerous researchers. God is clearly only interested in ethics or morals as you are, quite simply because God cannot say no. Unconditional love can't say no. So as Osho beautifully says, there is no God but godliness. God is a verb, not a noun. We must express the godliness within if we are ever to find peace within ourselves, and we cannot share peace with others that we don't have. It's simply impossible. Our next lesson, we will look at the meaning of the word religion. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. If you're interested in products that I've produced that cover these things in more detail, you're welcome to visit PPS Success Mastery Lesson 1, How to Find and Live Your Legacy, PPS Lesson 2, Self-Mastery, The Absolute Essentials of Osho, The Absolute Essentials of Rumi. My audio, There Are Only Two Kinds of Sex, Which Are You Having, which deals with these issues, PPS Success Mastery Lesson 9 and 10. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to sharing with you in Lesson 4.